Welcome, everybody. I'm Nicole Gurran, Professor of Urban and Regional Planning here at the University of Sydney, and I'm also the Director of the Henry Halloran Research Trust, which also runs this Festival of Urbanism. But before we begin, of course, I must acknowledge that we are here on unceded Gadigal lands, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend those respects to any Aboriginal people here in the room, recognising and I think it's appropriate to recognise, given tonight's topic, that many of the Gadigal people and many of the Bundjalung people, which is where I grew up, can't afford a home in their own country, and also face even more difficulties in the rental market with racism and discrimination, something that was brought home to me very profoundly in my recent role as Commissioner of the Independent People's Commission into the Housing Crisis. But we're talking comedy tonight as a means of, raising and drawing attention to some of the most difficult and challenging issues that we face as a society. So I just actually want to acknowledge some of Australia's best comedians. You are going to meet, of course, at least one of them tonight. But look, some of the best Australian comedies actually been produced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, as you know. I mean, one of my favourite shows is Black Comedy, uses humour very effectively to shine a light on actually endemic racism and injustice. It starred incredible comedians and artists like Sean Chulborough, Adam Fayaso, and Nakia Louie. And, of course, we've also got other amazing artists and comedians like Steph Tisdall. Actually, the speaker in our first opening session on Monday, Dr. Terry Junkie, also in another life, actually penned a novel which also used humour to raise attention to, some really deep and significant themes around racism and injustice. So, having said that, the Festival of Urbanism actually is all about using all of the tools at our disposal across the university and in wider society to raise attention to the problems and potentially to the solutions facing cities and regions. And so I'm absolutely delighted that we're holding tonight's festival event in collaboration with the Young Planners Division of the Planning Institute of Australia. And in a moment, I'll introduce the chair, Sebastian Aguilar, who's going to run tonight's session and also say something a little bit about the Young Planners. The last thing I wanted to tell you was that after our panel event, we've got a reception outside and there's going to be a really exciting announcement. So try and stay for that. Okay, so let me introduce Sebastian, who is a senior planning consultant at Urbis. Many of you will know that's a leading urban planning firm. He works in the residential sector across infill and greenfield housing projects, very relevant, of course. He's a peer Young Planning Committee member, regularly engages with students in universities, providing support to young professionals. And his passion for urban planning and housing stems partly from his experience in growing up in precarious and dilapidated rental housing across Sydney, and further his immediate family's positive experience with subsidised housing in Vienna, Austria. Thank you, Sebastian.
G'day everyone, thanks so much for coming. It's so good to see a massive full attendance of this type of event. And yeah, like Nicole said, my name's Sebastian Aguilar. I'm a senior consultant, a senior planning consultant at Urbis, which is one of Australia's largest property and public sector advisory firms. When I saw this event, it really sparked my interest because as a planner every day on the PIA, New South Wales Young Planners Committee, which is a division of the Planning Institute of Australia, which is the national peak body representing planners in the planning profession. I've never seen sort of an angle taken on planning policy and housing policy quite like this. So it really sparked my interest. And as Nicole said, I have quite a bit of experience in the the rental market as a renter now. Maybe my experience isn't so representative of renting now, but certainly in the past when I was growing up, my mum coming from Austria-Vienna, where they have a very successful public housing program, and then obviously coming to Australia for a bit of a better life, where she really struggled in the immediate initial period, working and living here and bringing myself and my brother up. So that's something that's really framed my passion and interest in this area. And I think as a planner who has to communicate these issues to the public, and then as well as in the Peer Become a Planner campaign, communicating these sort of issues effectively is become incredibly important. And so far, it doesn't seem to have cut across. I think a lot of the space and the industry space, less so academia, in my opinion, but more so industry, has convoluted it a bit, and it's been taken up by a few special interests, I think. So we need something that's a bit more earnest and authentic, and I think satire and comedy, I think, is a really unique way to do that. So for tonight, I'm not the star of the event tonight, but I'll be moderating the panel. And so I'll just introduce them quickly before we screen this really exciting film. So we have Mark Humphries, who's a very well-known satirist, best known for his viral political sketches, and he's a resident satirist on ABC 7:30, and I've seen him across various social media platforms when I was younger in uni and such. So I'm well aware of Mark Humphries' work. And then we have Lee Constable, who's a science communicator, TV producer and presenter, and a celebrated children's author. And then also Bill Code, director or filmmaker and video producer of this documentary that we're here for tonight, and who has a background as a video journalist for outlets such as the BBC, Al Jazeera, SBS, and The Guardian. So super impressive. On that note, I'd just like to invite Bill Code up to give a few opening remarks about the film and his experience.
Thanks, Sebastian, and thanks to Nicole and the team, and Linda and Greta and everyone running around this week to put on a fantastic week of events. I'd like to acknowledge we're on Gadigal country. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm an impact documentary maker, as it says on the screen there. Great to have a couple of entertaining and clever hosts of impact docs here tonight. We make impact documentaries. It's a bit of a buzzword, impact, if we're honest, in the last few years in the documentary space, but we make them so that we can create documentaries on social and environmental issues which have an impact campaign to go along with them to really kind of facilitate change in a given area. A couple of years ago, almost 2 years ago, in fact, I was facing yet another move in the inner west of Sydney with two kids who did not have stability of school, didn't have their dad living in the same place for more than 12 months consistently. I was looking at ripping out all of my beloved kale and spinach yet again from the garden and having to move house. And, it dawned on me that I wanted a next project to be on renting and housing. And looking at different ways to do that, given I'd made kind of impact documentaries in the past, which had been able to have, a kind of a small, tangible impact on a certain topic. I'd made a film about water and environment in northwest Victoria, which had achieved kind of small local goals in an environmental sense. But I really wanted to do something with a little bit more cut through, I suppose. There's a lot of, it's a competitive world when we're talking about, film and TV and the kind of projects that get commissioned. And, housing is on everyone's lips, but, you could argue change is very slow to come about. And I had worked with Mark Humphries a few years previously when I was at The Guardian, and he was doing the roast videos. And bumping into Mark and his co-writer on many projects, Evan Williams, I learned that Mark, like myself, was still enjoying everything the rental market had to offer in Sydney. And we hatched a plan after I'd made a little trial video 2 summers ago, and we hatched a plan to have, Mark in the story, meeting renters on the front line, the coalface in Sydney. But really, as that kind of project developed over the past 2 years, and we got a bit more of a snowball in terms of impact partners, which is really important, and obviously commissioning interest as well, we sort of changed shape. We created a pilot episode. At that point, it was going to be a series. We created a half-hour pilot episode with support of Screen New South Wales and the City of Sydney. That went quite well. We learned a lot, and now we are turning that pilot into a 1-hour special for a well-known streaming platform. It hasn't been announced just yet who that is, so I'll keep that quiet. So this will all hopefully come to life early next year. We have an excerpt from the pilot episode that was created. That excerpt will be in the final documentary next year. But the key that we hope is that we can have impact by using humour in a subtle way. It's not all laugh out loud. It's a serious issue, but we hope that we can really have a bit more reach if we tickle the funny bones, perhaps. So we'll show a short clip of Mark in action.
That was really good. I enjoyed that, and I wasn't expecting laugh out loud jokes, and I wasn't expecting there to be such an authenticness to it and an on the ground feel to it. And what I really liked as well, that it painted a story about the really simple, ironic fact that the people that the city needs to thrive and be a successful city can't afford to live in it. And I think that situation, while not laugh out loud funny, I'm not laughing at that person. It's just so ridiculous that it becomes funny. And you're just thinking, how is this allowed to happen? What are our policymakers doing that in a city such as Sydney that is supposedly so successful and so great to live, these people, nurses, firemen, essential workers can't afford to live here. So on that note, I'd like to invite up again Mark Humphries, or introduce and then invite up Mark Humphries, Bill Code and Lee Constable for a structured Q&A. And then afterwards, we'll open up for an audience Q&A if we have time. So I'll start with you, Mark, if you don't mind, since you're the star of the documentary. And
clearly,
do you mind telling us a bit what sparked your interest to be involved in this documentary? Was there personal experience or just a general interest?
I mean, I've spent my whole adult life as a renter. I'm still renting now. I think when Bill contacted me, I think I just received my 20% rental increase. That's right. It had gone up. That's right. It went from 500 to 600. And then in the course of us working together, it then went up an additional 10% to 660.
We've shared a few.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Exactly. That's how long we've been. But they came so rapidly. I mean, actually, it wasn't that far apart. So I was already furious. And I'm a great believer in using humour to channel your rage. And that, because obviously someone just ranting about something is not particularly palatable or appealing, but I think if you can find a way to massage that message into something slightly more enjoyable for an audience, then hopefully that can be effective. So that's what appealed to me about this, is it was a way to talk about a topic that I genuinely felt frustrated about, but could hopefully come at it in a way that could still operate as a piece of entertainment. So yeah, so that was really, it was, and in my time as a renter, I'd had, I think I had 3 consecutive properties where due to construction faults when after heavy rain, a room had been flooded. There was carpets had to be pulled up. This was mold was a recurring issue. I don't know if other people have had that experience, but it seems to be quite common. Hello, Will. How are you? And sorry. So I just had these, and I know that other people had experiences much worse than I had. But yeah, so primarily rage was the drive for doing this project.
And speaking of channeling your inner rage through comedy and such, how do you feel about, the media seems to frame the housing discourse and getting into housing and renting as you're just not working hard enough. We've all heard the avocado on toast, cut back on the avocado on toast and the coffees in the morning and you'll make it. I feel like looking at that story with that bloke, I feel like he's working pretty hard already, harder than most.
Yeah.
And he doesn't seem to be able to be making it.
Totally.
Do you think this, I guess, rebuts that? And do you think it's doing its job in that sense?
Well, I mean, I certainly hope so. I hope that the case studies that we'll look at in this will make that argument. But yes, no, in terms of how this whole debate is framed, and especially how it's portrayed in the media, shits me to no end. And I'm sorry for being a bit, casual with the language, but just I cannot stand another headline about how this couple amassed a whatever $2 million property portfolio in just 3 months or what have you. This is not a good thing. This is not something to be admired or for us to aspire to. This sort of hoarding of property, this obsession with property in this country. Housing is a human need. It really, really bothers me seeing that. And it's always presented, property, building up a property portfolio is presented as if not a get-rich-quick scheme, but a get-rich-quicker scheme. And I just think that scheme is garbage. I just think it's obscene. During the pandemic, when people were hoarding toilet paper, we didn't say how this plucky young couple amassed a $1.2 million toilet paper portfolio. It's obscene. It's not a good thing. That stuff really, really bothers me. The way that we have these discussions. This is Australia's entire attitude to property. And I've experienced this also firsthand where I put out a tweet, I think it was last year, where I just moved into another rental. It was a new build, and the previous place I'd been in had also been a new build. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you want to connect to the NBN for the first time, so on a new build, there is a $300 connection fee. And what I've discovered is that landlords don't want to pay this fee. People who own the property don't want to pay for their house to be connected to the internet. So if you as a tenant want to have the NBN, you are expected to pay this one-time $300 fee that then connects that person's property to the NBN forever. And so I'd already paid this at the previous rental, and then I'm now paying it at the next one. How many times can a person pay a one-off fee? And so I tweeted something to that effect. And of course, news.com.au got a hold of it, and they're really on the side of the renter, and so it was framed as, because I was working at the ABC at the time, of ABC, they want something for nothing, and just that whole so it got tied up in that whole sort of culture war debate, and there were so many comments from people about, why didn't you just buy a house? Just that, why didn't I think of that? I've just been buying NBN boxes like an idiot. So that was extraordinary to see that sort of backlash to anyone sort of speaking up about, it's a niche issue, that particular thing, but it's representative of just a general, struggle and difficulty being a renter in this country. End of rant.
Yes. Yes, certainly emblematic of the cultural, or in my opinion, the perverse cultural association or view of housing, that it's a commodity and something to be traded and sold like a market, whereas with education and health, those are something we've been able to come together and agree, okay, that there is a baseline we need to provide here, but that just hasn't reached it with housing yet for some crazy reason. I wonder who would be behind that.
Well, I blame the game Monopoly. You know, we raise our children to play this game where the aim is to acquire as many houses as possible. I think that's probably where we should start. Get rid of that.
Definitely. And now a question for you, Bill, if you don't mind. The Renters is just one of your projects. You're a very accomplished filmmaker and have made some others in the past. Do you mind telling us a bit more about how you and others in this space are trying to impact and educate the public opinion through documentaries such as The Renters? And I think I've got here, for instance, 2040, which was a climate change documentary, The Giants, Delicado.
Yeah, so it's definitely a growing space, impact documentary. We're lucky enough to have on our team Craig Reucassel as one of the EPs, and obviously Craig was behind War on Waste. So if you're thinking about documentaries that can really have impact, War on Waste changed, a great deal about the way we think about recycling in this country. Hundreds of schools and corporates and whatnot changed their policies on the basis of having screenings of episodes of that show, and even my kids have seen it, which is something impressive in the household. But look, in the impact documentary space in environment, there's 2040, Dam and Gamo and Anna Kaplan are making great kind of environmental films. They made that sugar film, which a lot of people may have seen, and moved on to doing environmental stuff. Changed the way we think about sugar consumption. The Giants is another recent fantastic film about Bob Brown's story, which is really being used as a really strong educational tool. So when you create an impact doc in 2024, you really think right from the very start, what is our impact plan? How are we going to have partners amplify our message? How are they going to do that? Here's the budget for production, and here's the budget for impact. The sad truth is doco producers are always thinking budgets most of the time, but you really make sure you've got a good amount put to the side for your impact plan so that you can create educational resources, so you can have a full-time impact producer. We're really lucky to have Leanne Torpy working with us, who did War on Waste, who did Magda Subansky's Big Health Check, and Ithaca, the Julian Assange doco. And so that means that the film can have a real shelf life for quite a few years. I made a film on over-incarceration of Aboriginal people in 2015, and it only had a small run. It went on NITV, but got that crucial kind of broadcast. And I was just starting out after leaving news and going to docs at that point, and did not create an impact plan or have a budget for an impact producer. But it's still being shown on kind of uni courses on stuff I didn't even think about at the time. I was just making a film, and now kids are looking at it in criminology courses, which is great. So if you kind of hit a niche and you hit a topic that people care about and want to hear about, you can do good things. And if you partner with the right people. So we, for The Renters, we've got a range of impact partners ready to go, starting with the Australia Institute and Anglicare, as well as it's going to be headed up by Everybody's Home, which are kind of the umbrella organisation. And to have these people who feel, I was going to say as passionate as we do, I hope they've thought about housing a lot more than we have over the years. So to have those people who are just actually really eager to have the film finished, that does everything you want as filmmakers, right? Because then you have a team of people who want to get this out in the world and have impact screenings, and hopefully shift the dial on this mess.
Yeah, and I think with comedy, or like the use of comedy and satire, that's a really I think tried and proven way, I think maybe not so in the documentary space, but way to do it, because it's something that can really cut through, and it generates a lot of interest and virality. So, and just for an example, like a completely different example of a documentary, a bit of a funny one, Cowspiracy, a long time ago. My brother watched it and became a vegan for a long time, and I have mates who swear by it, and they base their whole life around Cowspiracy. But that's more of like a shock horror element to it, where this is like maybe on the other side of the spectrum of the comedy.
Yeah, so, it's funny you say that, shock. I think with the pilot episode that we made, because we made it, we shot it over a year ago, and because the mainstream media has taken a bit of a while to catch up, perhaps, of what we were thinking a year ago, it's less now about those kind of frontline stories of people having shitty rental houses. Like we know now, right? Like a lot of people have terrible rental experiences. So we are now probably more solutions focused than that trailer sort of lets on. So we're really kind of looking at, how do we get out of this mess now? Because people, it's great to have a laugh, and it's great to learn about, the situation of others, but we need to platform some attainable solutions, because we think there are a few. Right? People in this room think there's a way out.
Would know, and I guess we'll just have to wait. The rest of the audience will have to wait and watch the documentary when it's out to see what those solutions are. Moving on to you, Lee. You've just come from that small conference down the road, South by Southwest, I think, and you're described as a science communicator, right? Do you mind telling us about how you go about educating the public about specifically environmental issues?
Yeah, so I've been toying with different ways of describing who I am and what I do. I've also tried science edutainer more recently, because science communication is just a broad umbrella term for all and any communications of science, which, could be journalism, it could be events, it could be TV and things like that. And I started out doing kids TV. I did a kids TV show that I got to host for 4 years called Scope with Network 10, where it was a half-hour weekly show, and we do a different part of the whole spectrum of STEM week in, week out, which was a great baptism of fire from doing my science degree to TV producing and presenting. But really it was during just early actually in the Black Summer bushfires. I decided to resign in November 2019. I'd seen more and more how dry it was getting, and that people weren't paying attention and things like that. And by the time I exited Scope, everything was on fire. And that's because I actually got into science communication, not to talk about all of the science, but really because my passion is around climate change. I'm a farm kid, so my folks are sheep farmers, and the farm I grew up on is in the southwest slopes of New South Wales, so about 4.5 hours southwest of Sydney, an hour and a half northwest of Canberra. And I grew up as any millennial who was a farm kid. Well, if you meet a millennial who was a farm kid and they're Australian, then they will be someone who's a child of drought, several droughts actually. Like my preschool days were getting picked up from preschool, and then we drove the cattle home together. But then throughout primary school and most of high school, I had drought. So that really was what made me want to get into science at all, environmental science. And now I guess I use more of those skills from TV and entertainment, and trying to get the idea across that you don't have to be doom and gloom to engage in this. I even found myself as someone who cares about climate. I'd sit down and be like, what am I going to watch? And I'd look at some documentary about fire or about Antarctica, and I'd just be like, I don't want to feel gloomy and angry. I already feel that way, I'm watching RuPaul's Drag Race. And so I guess that's what motivates me to think about the feelings behind it, and that's why comedy is a great tool. I think all of those feelings you have, whether it's anger about the rental crisis or climate change or whatever, or despair or whatever, they're all valid feelings, but I want to add a little bit of joy to how people can feel.
Oh, definitely. And I can definitely attest to doing the same thing, like retreating to escapist sort of media when I'm feeling too overwhelmed with stuff. And I think I mistakenly forgot to mention that you had a contribution to this documentary as well. Do you mind talking about that as well a little bit?
Oh, not the renters, but
Not the renters. There's sizzle,
The
right?
sizzle,
That's next.
yeah.
Okay, I got a bit ahead of myself.
yeah.
So we're just going to play a sizzle now, I think. I think we should leave the stage, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. We might be lost.
Just look at us.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Standing remotely.
I grew up on a farm in one of the worst droughts on record. It's pretty bare on the ground here. Oh, look, a little bit of green.
Your sister's finished in the bar.
Let me tell you, we were raised to understand the value of fresh water. Every drop was accounted for. Mum and Dad made sure nothing went to waste. A few years later, and we're facing a massive challenge. We're going to see what Australia can teach the world about our most precious resource. In just a few years, global demand for freshwater is going to outweigh supply. One river system sustains ecosystems, towns, and a multi-billion-dollar agricultural industry. The Murrumbidgee starts in the snowy mountains and flows 1,000 kilometres through farmland, wetlands, and our dry interior towards the sea. But our conversations around water have become charged, even toxic, and we need to get out of that trap fast. We're going to meet people putting meals on tables, the growers, but we're going to ask just how they do what they do on this arid continent.
It's probably 7 days since it left the dam, just until it arrives here. This area is the best place on the planet to grow rice.
As we explore the breadth of this one river basin, I want us to ask how we keep providing food for a rapidly growing global population without wrecking the planet we're growing it on.
We're so used to thinking of water either how much of that water is developing rice or cotton or almonds, forgetting that actually it had a role before. It wasn't going to waste anyway. It was actually producing this incredible biodiversity.
So that's our first challenge. These days, I make my living writing and talking about the environment. Water's at the heart of that. Communities like mine grow or falter depending on its presence. But now family farms like ours are in trouble. Few countries have commodified water benefiting big business to the extent Australia has.
If you've got enough money, you can go and buy water and add it to your farm.
I think we're on the tail end of the big fellas. We get what's left.
And then that poor farmer's got to sell his farm and get out and try and find some other job.
But we're also going to look at the progress being made, technical advancements to save water, and different ways of thinking from a new breed of farmers. I'm excited to share the stories of collaboration between First Nations groups reclaiming water rights and working with environmentalists and even agriculture.
I remember the old man crying, so one of the TNC staff rang him and told him we've won the tender for management.
It's gone from tarmac to bushes this high in the space of 5 years.
Guyana is very special. It's like an endangered species hub.
Instead of locking this place up, Guyana is thriving in no small part because of the day-to-day involvement of people. We're going to explore the story of water in Australia, understanding how we got where we are today as we grapple with the challenges of tomorrow.
That was also really good. I think as an undercurrent, like what I personally saw and the connection, not so much between, or like the underlying theme between that sizzle and the documentary is that idea of the subject matter, this one water, that one housing, is being treated like a commodity or like it's a business.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting and that what resonated with me. So I'm really keen to see more about that and more of your work because I think that's so very true. I guess off that, I imagine that maybe played a role in motivating you to make this sort of film. And I'm wondering where you hope it will go.
Yeah, well, really, it's this time last year that I met Bill at South by Southwest. There was like a meetup for filmmakers, and Bill had already been thinking about the Murrumbidgee for a long time before stumbling across someone who's from the Murrumbidgee catchment and happens to be into presenting and all those things, so it worked out well. But what we're really hoping in having an impact documentary is that impact. It sounds silly. I think we should rebrand all other documentaries as impactless documentaries, and I think that would really help us to get a bit more money, actually. But yeah, one thing is just that it's that everyday invisibility of it all, you know, going down the drain, the food that we eat, clothing, because obviously, you know, cotton and rice take a lot of irrigating. There's a lot of invisibility of water all around us, and making that visible a bit more, as well as the people on the ground, will be really important, I think. Also because there's a lot of city-country divide that is played up in politics too, and it's often, whether we talk about climate change and coal country or we talk about, you know, irrigators and farmers, the politicians that wear the biggest hats often use them as the biggest political pawns, you know, in this game. So it's good to hear from them directly rather than hearing from a politician with a big hat about what they do.
And I've seen that plenty of times. Now that's excellent. And
just to add to that, I think we're really, you know, because that film is considerably less developed than The Renters, but, you know, meeting Lee, who is, you know, we're both clearly environmentally minded people, but there is just such toxicity around this topic in Australia. You know, we didn't want to do something which was, you know, perceived as being about the Murray-Darling Basin Plan or whatever, which just turns people off straight away. And so, you know, to meet someone like Lee, who is a self-confessed farm kid, as you put it, who is clearly a very green farming kid. It's just, you know, we're really trying to get the different sectors together to accept that, you know, we're going to run out of fresh water, guys. Like we need agriculture to talk to the environment, and we need to have these difficult discussions, because people are telling us, you know, you're doing something on water. Good bloody luck, man. You know, so
yeah.
we'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, and I think on the topic of collaborating and getting different groups to work together, I'm now going to open it up to just a first pre-scripted Q&A question that came in earlier. Before I open up to Q&A, that is. Planners are often, and as demonstrated here, policymakers, politicians, planners, they often talk about these subjects, the environment. There's a very performative aspect to it, and there's also very serious. It's delivered very seriously and sternly, and it makes it very unappealing, and it makes it put on your doomer hat and just think, I don't want to hear about it. And there's a lot of jargon thrown around and technical wordery and stuff like that, and I think it's difficult for it to cut through, and especially as a planner, talking to the public about it, or to the community, or trying to articulate it to the community, it can become very difficult when you're just got that hat on, the planner hat, or the whatever hat it is in relating to the technical discipline. I'm wondering, is there something people like us, like myself or a politician, can learn from your social impact documentaries or comedy or satire in terms of how to communicate these issues better to the public?
Oh,
a bit of a long question. Sorry.
No, but I think comedy is just one tool. I think it's just, with all of these issues, you just want there to be a general conversation happening, and comedy can be one element of it. I think back to the last federal election and how climate change, the discussion about climate change really was a significant player in that. There was a lot of serious discussion, and you had your teal candidates who were presenting themselves as, you know, being more passionate about that area, and then there was comedy that was coming up in that space. I remember my friend Dan Illich did a wonderful work with, he got billboards up in Times Square, I don't know if you remember this, basically shaming the Morrison government for refusing to attend the global climate conference. And now, you know, it's not necessarily that those billboards, you know, turned the election, but it was one part of that discussion. So I think, yes, if you've got some money to throw some satirists, I'm sure Satire Inc. can help you.
It's a cure-all, really, I think. But But I think it is that conversation starter. You know, it's starting the ripple effect. It's also, you know, obviously Murrumbidgee Big Water is not a laugh out loud, but what we're hoping to have is kind of dramatizations of bits of growing up and bits of history and things like that. And it's almost, well, comedy is all about breaking tension too, because it's that spoonful of sugar to let the medicine go down. So it's not necessarily wall-to-wall comedy, but those little moments of levity are what enable you to learn the hard stuff too. So yeah, I don't know if you've got many moments of levity in your planner meetings. But perhaps that's something you should plan.
Something like something to light the mood. I think it would be definitely needed in a lot of meetings. They're often very hostile. When you've got multiple stakeholders like council, a private developer, you know, the consultants, it's very much hostile and conflict oriented in terms of resolving the issue. And it's always at the end about a compromise, but the compromise is arrived at through conflict and hostility. I think not all the time, but like most of the time, it definitely feels like that.
Sounds like you just needed like an audience warm up, just like
like, and I really appreciate those people who, whether they're in consulting or in private or in government, who really bring a sense of casualness and openness and authenticity. That's always appreciated. And those people can really stick out, and you really want to work with those people. Like, I imagine like yourself, Lee, working in that space, or like just being there on the ground. I think it would be a breath of fresh air, and such a contrast to like someone from a political party coming in with their Kubra and stuff. So
yeah, I think that actually there were some politicians due to touch down at Gaini after we left, weren't there? Because a lot of what we filmed there was out at the end of the Murrumbidgee in an area that is under ownership now of the Narri Narri Tribal Council. How long have they?
Oh, I think
6 years or something like
6.
that. Yeah.
An area about the size of Sydney, metropolitan Sydney.
Yeah, it had been taken over, obviously, through like a lot of Australia, and the farm that I grew up, you know, colonised, made into farmland. And Jamie, who we heard from there, from the Narri Narri Council, described it as like the surface of the moon when they first kind of had that area. But as you can see, it's green, thriving wetlands now, which is great.
Yeah, it's great story.
But he's quite... I was thinking about him as well, because, you know, when you're in a tribal council and you're taking over farmland and you're surrounded by farmers on all sides, and then you have all these stakeholders like Nature Conservancy and government and things like that, you know, that's very tense. But he's quite a funny guy too. You know, I do find that farmers and people who work on the land, whether they're First Nations groups or not, can be quite comedic in the way they break tension too. In fact, I think doing bad impressions of my dad ends up being a lot of where I get my laughs.
It's good to have a bit of levity, you know, take the inner city seriousness out of things, perhaps. Yeah.
Maybe start a TikTok. Yeah.
Young planners. That's nice. No, that's excellent. I might, if we have a roving mic now, I might throw it open to audience questions. So if anyone has there's a gentleman in the back has one.
See if this works. Yes, it does. This is probably a question more for Mark, but I'd like to hear everyone's thought on this. Very recently in the news, I'm sure everyone knows about the story that's growing about our Prime Minister and his most recent purchase up in the beautiful Central Coast. I've noticed that because there's no sleaze or corruption element to the story, it's just simply a very expensive home beyond the reach of everyone, including that nurse who'd been working for, 25 years, who will obviously never be able to reach that, even though no matter how hard he works. We were thinking that even if you went back, say, 5 years ago, because there's no corruption element or anything to it, you wouldn't see anything like the amount of attention that it's getting because there isn't that angle. And I've noticed that seems to be that the conversation has moved in a way. So I just really want to ask you, Mark, I mean, obviously, this is fuel for you. How have you noticed that the conversation regarding housing has changed, say, over the last, 10 years or so, and the sort of stuff that you could bring to the public eye that you couldn't before.
It's very interesting. Yeah, no, I've been watching the reaction to that piece of news closely, and I think one element that I've enjoyed is the Labor Party sort of, being true to its roots, and that much of the criticism of the purchase has come from within the Labor Party, and so I feel that's very on brand. I've seen some, I think it's whereas some Liberal Party members, I thought Dutton had I hate to admit it, a reasonably good joke when he was saying that Albanese was, clearly planning for his post, he was wishing him well for his post-politics life. That's right. Yeah, I think, but I think a lot of the commentary I heard, I was listening to Craig Reucassel's breakfast show this week, and I think I saw a lot of people defending. There was a lot of defense for that purchase, and it's. I think we've kind of still. I don't know. There was a lot more support for it than I thought. So I'm not really quite sure what the public mood is on that. But I think it's been. I've seen more support for it than I expected, especially since we, as the taxpayer currently, we give him 2 houses at the moment, and then of course he's got his property portfolio. So the whole thing with politicians and their portfolios, that's something that riles me up a bit. But I'm interested to see what the public mood is on that. In terms of how the conversation has shifted, I think I'm not sure if I can observe a change, just a sort of more just an entrenched attitude towards the goal of acquiring as much property as possible, and I think it's interesting. I think the Greens have done. Obviously there'll be criticism of the Greens, but I think they've done a good job at kind of carving out some territory and saying, hey, we're going to be the party of the renters. This 40% of the population that's sort of just been kind of ignored. So I think that's been a bit of a shift of just having one of the bigger parties say, okay, we're going to really take that seriously if the 2 majors aren't. So that'd be the main thing that I can think of. But but if anyone else can think of other things that they've...
I just think, with the Albo Clifftop stuff, I think, as someone who was a journalist for a long time for thankfully mostly good publications, I just think it's just wild and unbelievable timing. I think that's the news story in it. What was he thinking? Even if today they're going to announce no, we're not doing anything about negative gearing or whatever it is, and even if they think it's not going to be that damaging, it's just pretty remarkable timing.
I think something that's really shifted some of the conversation. As a regular TikTok user, Purple Pingers is the handle, and talking about shit rentals and things like that. And obviously within TikTok, that was something we were seeing, and as a lot of renters, because a lot of Gen Zs who do rent are on there. But that's also been, he's gotten slots on the project and things like that cater to a lot more landlords, I think it's safe to say. So I think that's getting out of that bubble. And again, using humour too. Not like overtly laugh out loud, but there's something about his hello. And then he's always got his mic on like a spatula or something else. And so it's been interesting. And Shit Rentals is quite a funny name. And it's interesting to see how that's shifted some of the conversation just in terms of bringing awareness to how crap it is out there.
Oh, excellent. Purple Pingers is hilarious. I reckon the deadpan delivery.
Yeah, now that I come to think of it, I'm like, his name's Jordan, but what is his last name? It's not Pingers.
What does that mean, actually?
Yeah, no idea.
I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Did anyone else have a question at the front, it looks like? Yeah.
You mentioned TikTok. The young planners were trying to engage with the next generation, both those in their early 20s or at university, but also the generation coming up who are now, 8 to 10 or 8 to 12, lived through a pandemic. They've lived, born around the GFC. How do we encourage the next generation to latch on to these issues, but also encourage them to do something about it? it's great that we've made an impact and we've made them aware, but how do we get that call to action to encourage the next generation to actually say, you know what, I don't like this, let's change it for our next generation after them?
Yeah, I think that's often something that impact campaigns are trying to do in schools. So that's why you often see so many school education-based impact campaigns paired with things like war on waste. When it comes to, I'll use an example that started as an impact campaign and ended up being a book that I wrote for kids. But because of war on waste, one of the bits of impact that you don't always measure, you might measure viewers, and you might measure certain things like petition signs and policy changes that you can see. But another impact of the first season of War on Waste was that Penguin approached me at the time to write a book for kids about waste because of the national discussion that had started. And I was thinking about exactly this, then recently, I guess, and this is also another ripple effect of that, because I wrote a follow-up that's about energy called How to Save the Whole Blinkin' Planet. The first one was How to Save the Whole Stinkin' Planet, about waste. But in each case, to a certain extent, we're dealing with things where it's out of kids' hands, especially when it comes to energy. At least with waste, they do tangibly have that in their hands at some point and make decisions about where it goes. But I found with energy, I was writing about the big bad climate change and the fossil fuel industry. It ended up being about being very solutions focused, highlighting, and it's a superhero story in both cases. So I think, again, I was trying to use humour. I was bringing in these superhero characters, and there are lots of fart jokes in the one about Stinkin' Planet, and in Blinkin' Planet, she loves to eat, and she loves her own energy. But a lot of the time when I do workshops with kids around environmental problems, I get them to talk about how they feel after they give me some examples, and they'll be like, I feel sad, I feel angry, and guilt is even something I've heard like a year 3 kid say. So I think, which is a heavy thing for them to feel, that frankly should not be something they're feeling. So I think often when it comes to kids as young as school age and underneath voting age, it is about focusing on solutions and local action and community connection, but not at the cost of talking about the big picture of who is responsible and what is responsible. And I think that's something that impact docs like War on Waste did really well, was looking at the everyday street example as well as the policy issues, and going to the electorate offices to bash down their doors. So I would say, solutions and thinking about connecting those two big pictures is really good for young people.
I mean, you could also try telling them that if they don't get interested in planning, they'll have to live with their mum and dad till they're at least 50. So maybe some threats as well.
There's lots of money in planning. You'll own a house unlike everyone else. Is that the truth? I don't know. Just lie.
Maybe not when you're just starting out, but I know fart jokes would have done it for me, I reckon.
Have we considered fart jokes?
There's not enough fart jokes.
I think you need more slapstick humour.
Yeah.
That does it for me. I love that stuff. Anyway, we're at the tail end now of this. I think we'll just close before we head out to reception with just a closing remark, and also just maybe if you could give everyone a sneak peek on the next thing you're working on. We'll start with you, Bill.
These two are more than enough to work on. Look, I'm going to be corny and say, if you love impact documentaries, support impact documentary. You are, Sebastian. You've asked a doco producer, and that's generally how we'll answer. Yeah. Search us out.
Definitely will. Mark?
Yeah, my message is stay angry. No, I really, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I'm optimistic we'll get this across the line, and I'm really thrilled that looks like we'll get to finally do this. And other than that, I'm going on tour next month, so please check out War on 2024 Annual Comedy Gala. Google it. I'll be at the Enmore with some other satirists, so that's that plug. I'm sorry.
No, I love a plug. Obviously, I've already shamelessly plugged my books for kids. But yeah, my next things that I'm working on, I'm always dabbling in things, but one of them is I have a drag king persona called Milton Mango, who's a bloke in the know. He's a farmer. Well, he's from the country at least, and using comedy through drag king performance to talk a bit about climate and things like that. So trying to find ways to get Milton out there a bit more He doesn't pay the bills, but geez, fun.
Excellent. Before I get everyone to thank our panelists and clap, I just want to encourage everyone when we do finish up to head to the reception for some drinks. I've got a very special piece of paper in my pocket that outlines the winners of the Reels competition. So if you could please, after clapping, make your way there as soon as you can. So yeah, please everyone give a hand to our